Shellard. He's a teacher at Dorothy Stringer High School, although I wasn't there when I went there, surprisingly, because I'm so young. And he's an officer at Brighton Hove NUT. I first met Paul around the campaign to stop Barndean becoming an academy, and now he's involved in the campaign to stop Hove Park doing the same daft thing. So, Paul, I invite you to say whatever you would like to say.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for inviting us. I want to start with something positive. In an era when union membership generally has been going down, it's pleasing to report that locally the NUT now represents over 80% of teachers in schools in Brighton and Hove, which is a considerable achievement, which I think enabled us in the action recently to close virtually every school in Brighton and Hove. So there's a sort of positive thing there, I think, about trade unions and the NUT particularly in building some more support amongst working people. The question we've been asked to discuss about Labour rebuilding trust. I mean, I think I'm probably old enough to remember a time when some Labour spokespersons actually used to speak about education. Sadly, I think for a considerable period of time now, Labour spokespersons have actually tended to talk about standards or exam results and not about education in its broadest sense. So many of those issues, the positive issues to do with education as being a liberating, enhancing force, tend to have been lost because it's just been narrowed down to the results that people are achieving, that children are achieving in schools. And of course it reminds you that there was a time when Labour was at the forefront of pushing positive educational change with the comprehensive ideal, when all the ideas about the divisions and the underachievement there were through having the system where children were separated into those that were going to achieve academically and those weren't, where that was challenged and opportunities for all became the kind of watchword. And I think it's really sad that in the decades since then, that consensus has kind of been destroyed, so that anything comprehensive is now generally seen as being dull or representing uniformity or underachievement. And I think in many ways what Labour has to do is to try to rebuild and renew support for that comprehensive ideal. I think sadly what's tended to happen with Labour spokespersons is everything has become narrowed down. So often it's been an attempt to almost like outrigger the Conservative spokespersons, sometimes trying to actually avoid the issues because we don't want to be associated with certain things, and seeing teachers as a group of professionals as being kind of problematic and untrustworthy. This is a group of people who've been trained at public expense with a great deal of expertise and experience, but are seen so often as the problem. And I think it fits in with the idea that's been pushed in society ever since Thatcherism, that anything that's private is seen to be associated with positive things, with making great achievements, and anything that is public seems to have negative connotations attached to it. You take that with private schools, for example, where Labour seems almost silent on private education. Now, you might expect it to be challenging the kind of entrenched privilege, the private schools having charitable status, or arguing that private schools should be integrated into the kind of community state system. But instead, it's all been about how can state schools emulate private schools, which is certainly not what we want to achieve. I think there's lots of things we could do if we had the same levels of funding and the same class sizes, but I don't think emulating is what we want to do. Or the rather patronising idea that private schools should just share some of their facilities or show ordinary state schools how things should be done. I think, to be honest, it should be the other way around. They should be learning from state schools how effectively we have used resources in the state sector to work with the full range of children and not just the privileged few. The Tory agenda, I don't want to say too much about this because I kind of think it's taken as read, but it has been about privatisation. It's been about creating academies which has both been to undermine trade unions quite clearly, because they want to change the national pay and conditions and allow business in to run sections of the education system. But I also think it's been about undermining local authorities, because local authorities are associated with that kind of public social provision that is so alien to Tory ideas. Ofsted has been used as the battering ram in many senses, and data, which you might have thought should be used to help people understand what's going on, has been the thing that has been, I suppose, promoted to be the most important thing. So everything is then down to testing and exam results. That's had negative consequences for teachers and for schools in general, because it means pressure is being exerted on schools. It means sometimes the management in schools exert pressure on teachers and other staff within those schools. It's had a negative consequences for children's education, both in terms of the stress that it's caused, but also, I think, in terms of building up a generation who see that things are only judged as worthwhile if they're to pass a test, or if it will, if you can cut corners, or if you can short circuit things. Everything is justified as long as it's to pass that test. So distant from the kind of educational division that I think Labour should have. So why, I think the opportunities that Labour have missed out on, so many opportunities in terms of the corruption there is with academies and the waste of public money with free schools. If you stay on the same theme, the massive waste of public money, I hope sometimes someone does the research about how much money has been spent by Ofsted over the years. Hasn't raised standards at all, but it's a scandal, the amount of money that could have been spent on positive educational initiatives that has been put into basically monitoring and bullying teachers and schools. Why teachers specifically lost trust? We've been trained at public expense, but I don't think our experience has been taken account of or valued. The workload pressures are such that teachers, young teachers, feel that they no longer can stay within that system, and 2 out of every 5 teachers leaves the profession within 5 years, a massive waste of public resources and talent. We've had performance-related pay that has been introduced, although we have been successful in resisting it in many areas, an attempt to kind of pit teacher against teacher and make us compete, whereas education should be about collaboration and cooperating with each other, which is what teachers do and other staff in schools on a daily basis in order to provide a service to those who are learning within the system. So many initiatives have been imposed, and testing, over-testing has become the norm. So in terms of rebuilding trust, what I think we need to do is actually put trust in teachers and other staff who work within the schools. We need to base it around collaboration and cooperation, being innovative and being inspiring. We need a new vision of what comprehensive education could be, and it's got to be about community values rather than about individual competition. And although I'm not a great fan of lists, very quickly to finish off with, I picked 5 things that I think would be positive in getting the support and trust for teachers, and 5 things for education generally. I think it's necessary to restore national pay regulations for teachers, so that across the country teachers are paid the same, and it's essential to restore negotiating rights for teachers on pay and conditions, which we haven't had for years. I think that's basic trade union principles. We need to, secondly, involve teachers in planning the education system. We need to have limits to teachers' workload, and we need to see teaching as a career where people need to have the opportunities to take time out to kind of refresh themselves, to work with their colleagues rather than being pressurised. And we need to make sure that the idea of teachers being properly trained and there being a qualified teacher in every classroom is uppermost, and we should not compromise on that. The 5 things for education generally, I think Labour needs to build that around funding education properly and putting a lot more money, particularly into preschool education. We need to have curriculum change that is consulted on by all those with an interest in education and not just imposed. We need to abolish that testing regime, and we need to focus much more on teachers and others who work in education being able to share good practice and being inspired by that experience. And then we need to, I think, dismantle this idea of academies and free schools and try to rebuild a community system or local authority system where there's a good local school for everybody, and the state system is looked up to as being positive, which I think it is by many parents, and what Labour has to do is be more in accord with their views rather than ridiculous ideas about being out of touch. I suppose the final thing, I just want to mention the Hope Park campaign, because symbolically it's really important, because that's the first school, secondary school, under the new system that will become an academy. We've had a ballot, not for industrial action, but just on the principles amongst the working staff at the school, and got a big majority against becoming an academy. There's already a very effective campaign in the community, and the other really good thing that happened, the students at the school actually took action, and all the pics of them holding a banner against the academy was online, etc. And they did it in their own time. They didn't walk out of lessons, they did it at lunchtime, even though they'd been told not to. And I think it's the combination of those things that will see us being successful in opposing that academy, like we did for the Van Dien idea before. And I'll stop there.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Paul. And